Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. If everyone can please have a seat, and welcome to the August 16th, 2016 meeting of the Los Gatos Town Council. If you haven't already done so, please silence your devices. And Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Thank you and good evening. Councilmember Marcia Jensen.
Here.
Councilmember Rob Rennie.
Here.
Councilmember Steve Leonardis.
Here.
Vice Mayor Mariko Sayak.
Here.
Mayor and Chair Barbara Spector.
Here. To lead us in the pledge, I want to call forward Annalisa Wales. Annalisa, if you could please come up. And after she gets up here, I'll tell you a little bit about her. And if I say something that's incorrect, you'll tell me, okay? Annalisa Wales is in the 6th grade. She's homeschooled, and she goes to the Young Genius Speech and Debate class. You may recognize her by her last name. Her sisters Scarlett and Catherine, both of whom are here, have previously led us in the Pledge of Allegiance. But we have Annalisa here this evening. Annalisa has performed with the Moscow Ballet in the Nutcracker for 4 years. She is on the swim team. Her favorite subject is math. She plays the piano and performs with the chorus. And I asked her, how do you differ from your two sisters? How are you most different? And the answer was, she is less bossy. They may disagree with her. So at this time, would you please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Go on down. Me.
Steve, get up.
Let's give her another round of applause. Now, at this point in our agenda and in our month, I have the opportunity and privilege to do the Small Business Big Applause Award. It is a business that has served Los Gatos generally sometimes under the radar, but for a long time and really well. So before I get into the proclamation, I would like Lisa Spino and whoever you're with to come on up. Valerie, I'm sorry. I think everybody wants to come up. All right, let's get some of you on this side, or else my right side will feel lonely.
All righty.
All right, here we go. And Valerie, all right, and the business is Los Gatos Nail Works. So let's give them a round of applause. And now the proclamation. Whereas Los Gatos Nail Works has been owned and operated by Valerie Spino in downtown Los Gatos for over 30 years, and whereas Ms. Spino began working for a family friend in 1978 when she fell in love with the town of Los Gatos and was inspired to open her own business, Los Gatos Nail Works. And whereas Los Gatos Nail Works is home to a wonderful team of salon contractors serving a large client base from the greater Silicon Valley, 3 of whom have been working together since the business began. Whereas Los Gatos Nail Works values their clients and the personal relationships that are built through time spent providing high-end services that provide healing touch of stress relief along with hand and foot care. Let's give a round of applause to this month's small business. Now, I think you probably have something to say. And if you don't, this group over here does.
We're very excited to receive this. When I was first aware of this award, I was a little surprised. I wasn't expecting it, but I was happy, very excited to get it. I just have to tell you, in those 30 years, most of us all worked together. We've been a big family, a big group. A lot of you have seen me. We sometimes sit in the window, the whole group of us. I will have to say it's just my name on the lease, but for the most part, it's everybody here that makes the Nailworks. But I want to thank you all for supporting us and passing by. Thank you.
We have someone else who wants to say something. Tell us who you are.
I am Joseph Spino. I am Valerie's son, and I have prepared a little speech. And so, I would like to thank you all for being here to recognize my mother as Business Owner of the Month. I recognize her as the mother of my life. She has been working in the nail business for, as she said, 30 years. I think that I only know that she works here for my whole life. The Nailworks has been a great foundation for me growing up. I have learned to love it and love being there. All these people working here are just like family. I want to thank the town of Los Gatos, and I would like to say that we are all looking forward to the future.
Wow. Well, that was a surprise and a wonderful one. I've got Mom crying there. Thank you all, and congratulations. While we gain our composure, I'll look to the town attorney for the closed session report.
Yes, good evening. Prior to the regular session, councilmen in closed session to discuss real property negotiations. No action was taken that requires reporting under the Brown Act.
Thank you. We are now at council town manager reports, starting with, I should say, this is our opportunity to share with the community any meetings or whatever that we have been involved in since our last council meeting, starting with Ms. Jensen.
I have nothing to report.
Mr. Rennie.
I have something to report. I just don't remember what it was. Last Wednesday, I chaired the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Authority Board, which is the new energy company we're starting, and we also had one executive committee meeting before that. Also on Monday, August 8th, the mayor and I met at the Ad Hoc Parking and Infrastructure Committee. That's it.
Thank you. Since our last regularly scheduled meeting of August 2nd, I did attend the Ad Hoc Parking and Infrastructure meeting, and we will be sending, have decided upon, and will be sending forward to this full council a recommendation with regard to the parking structure and how it should progress. I attended the Chamber of Commerce ribbon cutting for Kumon Math and Reading of Los Gatos, and also the CDAC, the Community Development Advisory Committee, where the committee considered a development at the corner of Shannon and Blossom Hill and Boulevard, Shannon and the Boulevard, and also a hillside development with 8 structures. Ms. Sayak.
Thank you. In addition to the CDAC meeting that Mayor Spector had just mentioned, I did attend the policy committee, which Councilmember Johnson and I both attended. On August 8, Councilmember Rennie and I were part of the Los Gatos Montessorino Police promotional ceremony where we promoted 3 of our officers. And on August 9th, I had the pleasure of welcoming our youth commissioners to their new term. We have 20 new youth commissioners that serve the town in an advisory committee, and they're just amazing, and I hope all of you get a chance to meet each one of them.
Mr. Leonardis.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. It was last Wednesday, August 10th. I was attending the West Valley Sanitation District Board of Directors meeting. It was a general business meeting. I have nothing further to report.
Thank you. Madam Manager.
Thank you. Just want to welcome all of our students back to school, both our public schools and our private schools, and we encourage all of you to try walking and bicycling to school this term. Thank you.
Thank you. We are now at our consent calendar items. The way this works is if any member from the council pulls an item, we will hear it. Anybody from the community pulls an item, we will hear it. Otherwise, it will be voted upon in one motion. Tonight, our consent items consist of items 1 through 3. Anybody from the council wish to pull an item? Anybody from the community? Noting no one, before I ask for the motion, I just want to note to staff that the report on the Silicon Valley Regional Interoperability was very helpful, and so thank you. May I have a motion?
Moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. Discussion. Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Consent items pass unanimously. Verbal communications. I don't have any cards, but if anybody wishes to address us on an item that is not on the calendar, you may do so. You have 3 minutes. And I'm pausing here because somebody may wish to address us in verbal communications. They do not. All right, anybody, again, on verbal communications? No one's coming forward. We will now go on to our public hearings. We have one public hearing this evening. This is Agenda Item 4, Architecture and Site Application S13090, Investing Tentative Map Application M13014, Property Location, Southerly portion of the North 40 Specific Planned Area, Lark Avenue to south of Nodden Avenue. Applicant Grosvenor USA Limited, property owners Yuki Farms, ETPH LT, Grosvenor USA Limited, Summerhill N40 LLC, and Elizabeth K. Dotson and Bill Hirschman. So this is a continued hearing. So before we go forward, I just want to give some process. The way the process will begin this evening is I will ask staff if they have anything they wish to provide us, any information. I will then look to council and ask council if they have any questions of staff. And after we get through those 2 steps, I will then explain to everybody how we will be proceeding. So starting with staff.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Staff has nothing to add.
Do we have questions of staff? I do have one question of staff, but I have to find it here. I was reading the general plan. That's what I do, the housing element. And one section of it states, if housing affordable to very low and low income households is part of a mixed use development, it will occupy at least 50% of the mixed use development. The affordable housing will occupy at least 50% of the mixed use development. So to staff, for the purposes of the application before us this evening, did the lower income housing occupy at least 50%? And if so, how was that percentage calculated?
Thank you, Mayor. So staff looked at the mixed-use building, which contains the affordable housing for the very low-income seniors, and those square footages were used to determine whether or not it was 50% of that commercial space. Additionally, there is one other building that contains mixed-use development, does not contain any affordable units, and that is building A1, which has the 8 apartments and the 2 live-work units above it across from the Market Hall and senior housing. So the other calculation there is not giving credit for the non-affordable residential, but including the commercial for that component as well, and that also meets the 50% threshold. Staff did not include the 3 standalone commercial buildings as they are not mixed-use buildings.
Thank you. And any questions for staff on that issue? Seeing none. All right, then the way I am asking the council to proceed on this is for the purpose. Well, first I'm going to talk to the community. You may be hearing things from the council this evening that you like. You may be hearing things from the council that you don't like. But I would ask you to give us all the respect that we have given you. And I would ask that there be no audible expressions of your liking or disliking what we say. So that's the first thing. For the council, I'm going to suggest that we begin with discussion, if there is any discussion, before we get to a motion. And also with regard to the council, it may be that somebody on the council will say something, and if we were in a social setting, you would just like to ask them a question. Mr. Rennie, what do you mean by that? But as our rules require, everything does go through the chair or the mayor, and so I will ask that we do it that way tonight. So, for example, if Mr. Leonardis makes a motion, you have a question about the motion, that's fine, but just state the question and then not directly to him, but just state it, and then we'll see if he wishes to respond or not. Any questions on that? Nothing unusual. That's how we do things. All right, so then let's get to the council discussion motion, since we have no further questions. And Ms. Jensen. And is this discussion or motion?
This is a discussion which may lead to it's going to be long. It's going to be long. So maybe Ms. Lombardo can make that a little bit bigger. But at our last meeting on this item, and I stand up because I used to try cases and I'm way more comfortable standing up, so that's why I'm doing it. The red outline portion is what I'm going to call the specific plan area. When I started getting involved in planning in Los Gatos I'm not going to tell you because it's too long ago, I was on the General Plan Committee, and way back then, we were discussing a specific plan for this North 40 area. We discussed it for many years. In 1999, we came up with a proposal, which we put together in a nice book, a nice specific plan. It was presented to the council at that time. It had commercial uses, it had office uses, it had no residential uses, it had limitations on traffic. It was pretty straightforward, and it was never adopted. So why would the town want to do a specific plan? Because if you look at this parcel here, it's all trees, there's no infrastructure, there's no streets. If you look at the property around it, you see all the streets, you see how it's configured. It makes sense to plan for a particular area. That's what zoning is all about. The specific plan is a zone. It is zoned in different districts. Just like the Almond Grove is zoned residential, this specific plan is zoned for particular areas, for particular uses, with the idea that it will be developed over time. When the Almond Grove was zoned residential, no one dropped all the houses in at once. No one planned for the houses at once. Those houses get evaluated per the zone, and you have a right to build your house in that zone. So every time you hear the by right development, it means if I'm in a residential zone, I could build a house. So there's a specific plan area. And so if you could show me the next slide. is not the right one. Oh, no, that is the right one. Sorry. So that's why we did a specific plan. That's what we have. People have, and before we get to this, people have asked, why aren't we seeing the rest of the plan? Just like we're not seeing the other houses in the Almond Grove, we're not seeing the rest of the plan because that property is not owned by everyone. And I think there's another picture there, Shannon, that you might have skipped, which shows pretty, may not be there. There's a picture of the plan area in any event that shows the northern portion, which shows, that's it. If you look at the northern portion, the yellow and the red, those are all developed areas. So when you talk about, well, why don't we see it all? There's multiple property owners, multiple land uses, and so the specific plan was developed with having to take those into account. So we're not starting with a blank slate and filling it in. So thank you. Now we'll go to the next one. So that's the general explanation of a specific plan and why we would do it. And I'm going to take the various issues that have been raised by the many meetings that we've had, the many email communications we've gotten in order. These represent, you're going to see slides that look like this. These are the minutes of the meeting where the specific plan was adopted in June of last year. And I've highlighted specific areas, and then I've put in pink the bottom, which unfortunately doesn't show up very well. But this one is about infrastructure, traffic, and it indicates that the developer is going to pay for infrastructure improvements. It's all going to be funded by the developer, and the developer has to pay school and traffic impact fees, and that motion passed unanimously. So the next one. We did, and these are tiny, so I apologize. As part of this development, all of you know, an EIR was done, and part of that EIR was a traffic study. Traffic studies are tricky things because traffic studies are done by charts and data. Traffic study in this particular instance was done by looking at charts that are put together in giant books by the International Traffic Engineers, and they take a particular use and they assign a number of trips to it. All of us that drive around say that can't possibly be right, and so we need to have more studies. So the town did look at different things and did include different things in the studies, and I'll get back to the charts from after I talk about this. But the council looked at that EIR and it said, you know what, we haven't talked about all the traffic impacts. We need to talk about Dell Avenue, Samaritan Office Building, Samaritan ER, and we need to talk about alternative ways of computing traffic because we might not trust the International Traffic Engineers. And also up there are other things that we wanted to have come back to us, a school demographic study, an additional economic report, but staying with the traffic. So we did get that information back. It included Dell Avenue, it included Good Sam, it included office buildings, and it also included alternative traffic calculations. The fact is that when all that came back with what people had to do to make that work, the council accepted that because that information was valuable and it was accurate based on the means we used to calculate traffic. Many of you have said, that traffic study and that information is old. It's from 2014. Have you seen the traffic now? Of course, I drive in it. But the reason we use data to get back to that is, picture, if you will, something you're all familiar with. If I did a traffic study today, or actually, let's say on Tuesday, October 1st at 8 o'clock in front of the high school, the conclusion would be tear down the high school, widen the street to 6 lanes, and then perhaps you would achieve traffic mitigation for that. If I did the same study on Tuesday, June 15th at 8 a.m. in front of the high school, the conclusion would be you can build 5 high schools. And in fact, you can make this a lot narrower, just have bike traffic. So traffic studies are a product of when they're done, how they're done, why they're done. That's why people end up using data. And it's uncomfortable. We don't like it because doesn't necessarily reflect our experience, but that's what we have to go with, and that's what the council accepted. So we have the traffic study, and we have requirements in the EIR and the specific plan for actual improvements to our infrastructure that need to be made around any development that happens on the North 40, be it this application or any application that comes forward. So actually, what this requires is infrastructure getting built in our town that doesn't exist now. And I'm not here to say whether that's going to be good, bad, or indifferent, but traffic engineers say it'll make it better. The next issue that I've heard is with respect to schools, and we can't absorb the impact on the schools. Here's the motion that the council heard in June 2015 regarding schools. Councilmember Redney asked to make sure that developers worked closely with the school district to project enrollment growth and address overcrowding. Again, you can't see it, but it passed unanimously. And so the next slide is, here's a letter from Superintendent Diana Abadi indicating that the school district and the developer reached an agreement, independent of state law, which I'll discuss in a second, to contribute either 2 acres of land or $23,500 per house market rate unit built on the application to the school, which ends up being about $6.5 million. So the school did actually engage in that agreement, and the developer actually did what the town council wanted them to do in working with the schools. We also had an extra demographic study, which you saw in the last slide, which indicated that there would not be particular impacts from this project, but we still have this agreement. And then going back to the state law severely restricts what local jurisdictions can do with respect to schools. We can't consider the impacts. All we can do is collect a fee from a developer for any development that goes on. It's a set fee that's required by state law. We can't do anything about that. Unless this legislature changes the law, it hasn't. So that's schools. The next issue that I hear is about is housing. This one is very complicated. We had I'm not even sure what that is. That's the school agreement. Okay, never mind. We don't need to do those. Let's skip to number 7. This is the motion with respect to mixed use and housing and affordable housing in particular. We just had a question from the mayor regarding mixed use housing. This is an indication of when it can be built, what categories it needs to be in, and again, in the pink line that you can't see, it passed unanimously. So again, we can't see it, but the implication is, well, so we have state requirements for regional housing needs assessments. We need to chip in by state law. We need to do our part. Los Gatos needs to build 619 houses. We had a very dedicated housing element advisory board that was developers, business owners, citizens that worked really hard to figure out where could we plan for that? Not where we could build it. Where could we plan for it? And one of the things that we did was plan for it to occur on 13.5 acres on the specific plan area, not this application, the specific plan area. What are the consequences if we don't have a certified housing element and we don't plan for it? Well, they're up there, and it's basically a lawsuit. It could be a suspension of any right for any building permit in town. So if you wanted to redo your house, you couldn't if we didn't have a certified housing element. It could be challenges. It could be court-enforced housing elements or state-enforced or court-enforced decisions on land use, which we don't have now. So there are real significant consequences. What's another consequence if we don't do something here on this application, or if we don't do something that we've planned for that's in our certified housing element? We need to put it somewhere else. And what we discussed in the Housing Element Advisory Board is rezoning land on Los Gatos Boulevard, the rental place next to Classic Burgers, the Ace Hardware. There's other places that we discussed, but we'd have to put it somewhere else. We can't just bury our head and have it go away. So that's part of the housing. The other thing that I hear, and I think that I'm going to look at the slides that you have, but no, not that one. We already did that one. But that indicates why the housing is hard to move. So, I've heard it's too dense, it's too intense. Well, here's one about open space. This was the motion that was made on open space. Our specific plan calls for 30% open space, 20% should be publicly accessible. And we actually opted to use communal open space rather than private. That motion passed unanimously. As we heard, I know you all are following this very carefully, at our last meeting, we have limitations, again, state law limitations on what we can do, what we can't do. We can't require a park. We can't require more open space. We can require what's in our plan. Our plan requires 30%. And finally, I'm going to get to the economic. Oh, this is one about a motion regarding drought. Many of you said, well, we need green open space. And by that, I think you mean lawns, etc. We made a motion that we need drought-tolerant plants and a water-efficient landscape ordinance. Lawn doesn't fit in there. The trees do. Again, that passed unanimously. And now our downtown economics. And again, I've got pink. This is the only place where the council disagreed. When we got to the end of the meeting, there was a motion made by now Mayor Spector to include a chart in our specific plan limiting the square footage of commercial space, and without specifying numbers. That motion failed. Another motion was tried. That motion failed. But the motion that did pass included not putting a table in, keeping a maximum number of commercial space, and requiring that any person that comes in and applies for commercial open space needs to present an independent economic study about the impact of that space on the downtown. Vice Mayor Sayoc then added a condition that not only did it need to do that, but it needed to go back to our Conceptual Development Advisory Committee for public input on the impacts of that space. That passed 3-2 with Councilwoman Spector and Councilman Leonardis opposed. And then the only other motion on the economics was a comparison of conditional use permits to the North 40 and downtown. Again, that passed, or the first one failed. The second one, not to do that, passed again 3-2 with Councilwoman Spector and Councilman Leonardis opposed. With respect to the economics of downtown, we've had 3 independent studies. One that was done for the EIR, a second that was done pursuant to a motion before the EIR was certified in 2014, and a third that was a supplement to the Planning Commission. And so where we are now is we have a specific plan, which was, we moved to adopt it in June of 2015. Again, that passed 3-2. And as you saw from the motions that were made, the opposition was basically for downtown economics. And the split on the council on downtown economics has gone beyond this motion to whether to retain formula retail, whether to allow outdoor seating, whether to allow entertainment. And what I would say to the downtown business owners is competition is good. Rather than trying to build a wall off to other people, work with your council to make the downtown the best it can be. Work with us to deregulate so that you can compete on an even level and make our downtown greater than it already is. The next thing I wanted to talk about was look and feel, and the only thing I'll say about that is beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Some of us might not think of 3-story Mediterranean with white Mediterranean with red tile roofs would blend well in an orchard or look good from the freeway. I was actually in Yountville this weekend, and I visited a place that was built on a winery that was owned by an Italian family who had lived there forever. And the place that was built had won all kinds of architecture awards, had a plaque up to honor the family. Its architecture looked like this. It was flat-roofed using reclaimed wood and steel. It had a meandering path with, believe it or not, community gardens on the side of it. It had artwork, and it fit that space in Yountville. We can all disagree about that, but that's a subjective standard. So this council is going to have to decide whether that matches or not. I only have, bear with me, I've just got 2 more things to say, or 3 actually. So litigation. Lots of you have said, don't worry about litigation. We'll deal with that. Unfortunately, Mr. Schultz said we shouldn't worry about that. I happen to think it's irresponsible, being a lawyer myself, not to consider litigation and litigation risks. and the cost of that litigation. I wouldn't do that as a steward of the town. I need to think about that. Litigation is expensive, and we need to know what the risks are. And frankly, being a lawyer, coming from a family of lawyers, if I get a letter from a lawyer that says, we reserve our rights to do X, Y, and Z, that's a lawyer doing their job. That's not a lawyer bullying. Bullying, and I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to do this. Bullying is being called a murderer in a town council meeting. Bullying is getting an email that says you're going to be run out of town if you vote a certain way. Bullying is getting cars broken into and trashed. Bullying is tagging a sign next to a freeway. That's bullying. And for me to stand up here and say what I'm saying, I recognize that there are going to be personal consequences to it, but I have to be courageous enough to stand up to that and do what I think. Some of you have said, well, you were hired to do X, Y, Z. I think I was hired to be a responsible steward for the town. And I think that where I'm going to end up on this is what I think that is. And where I'm going to end up is many of the communications we've gotten are pitting developer versus town. And what we're forgetting is the Yuki family. The Yuki family has lived in Los Gatos since the 1940s. In the 1930s and 40s, Takeo Yuki bought some land in the Salinas area and started an iceberg lettuce farm. He developed that into the most successful Japanese farming operation in the area. In 1942, Takeo Yuki and his family were interned during World War II. They were fortunate enough that they had a white male business partner who was able to keep that property for them during the 3 years that they were in a concentration camp. Mr. Yuki could not farm anymore, so he became a cook. When they got out of that concentration camp, they had property, but Salinas was not friendly to Japanese at that time. So they bought land in Los Gatos, a welcoming community, someplace where they could go and start their business and put down roots for their family. That was in 1945. They've been here since 1945. They have given property in 1956 to Highway 17 so that it could be built. Why? To circumvent the downtown, ironically. In 1960, we heard a suggestion a couple nights ago that the Yukis should donate 6 acres of their property for a school site, and we could name it after the Yukis. In 1960, the Yukis donated the land for Ralph O. Berry School. It wasn't named after the Yukis. It was named after Ralph O. Berry. I don't know who he is. But they have donated land for a school. It's now a community asset as a JCC. In the late 1980s, they donated land. Thank you, Ms. Weidman. I never walk out on you. That's fine.
Please.
I'm sorry. They donated land for Highway 85. So the Yukis have been a steward for this community. They have done a lot for this community. And to ask for them to give more at this time seems to me to be a bit unreasonable and a bit unfair. We all live in houses that probably were once an orchard. We all expect to be able to dispose of our property. We spend time in the Planning Commission and we spend time in the Town Council figuring out how property should be used, how it can be used, but we try to be fair. We don't really say, no, you can't. We figure out how to do it. That's why we spent time since 1999 figuring out how to do the specific plan. And I happen to think that it's the right thing to do for the town. We are getting an infrastructure improvement. We are getting various other, the school is getting an agreement. But some of you have said, well, what will your legacy be? And I don't know what my legacy will be after tonight. It's probably going to not be too pleasant. But for me and for my children, by the way, my son works in Los Gatos. He cannot afford to live here. He rents a house with 4 other people in Almaden because he can't afford it. Many of you read the letter from the planning commissioner in Palo Alto who moved because she's a lawyer, her husband's a tech professional, couldn't afford to live there. It was poo-pooed on social media as not reality. Well, there are professionals, my child who works in a tech startup, who cannot live here. And the fact is that a $900,000 house in Los Gatos is really cheap. My son still couldn't touch it, but at least it's something. And I would want my legacy to be that Los Gatos is an inclusive community, it's a forward-looking community, it's a free-thinking community, and that it treats people fairly and goes through a process and then tries to do the right thing. So my motion would be to approve the application, and I probably won't get a second, but that's my speech and that's my motion.
Thank you. I have a motion. Is there a second? Seeing none, the motion dies for lack of second. I will be making a motion now, and I will ask the council to please listen to it because it is going to begin with provisions from the specific plan before I get to the actual motion itself. And this motion is based on actual specific plan requirements. The specific plan requires smaller cottage cluster. The specific plan suggests smaller cottage cluster in the Lark area. It speaks to lower intensity residential envisioned for the Lark district. That's paragraph 2.3.1. It anticipates lower intensity shops, offices, residential land uses envisioned in the southern portion. That's paragraph 2.4. Appendix 6C of the specific plan says that the specific plan development should address Los Gatos' unmet needs, and those unmet needs are identified as Generation Y and baby boomers. The development standards within the specific plan in Section 2 provide that we should ensure future development is compatible with surrounding areas, complement the downtown, and contribute to the small town charm of Los Gatos. The development standards of Section 2 say that the application projects should be consistent with the land uses and vision of as outlined in this chapter. This is an architecture and site application. Our architecture and site ordinance states, paragraph 4, we must examine site layout, including its appearance and harmony of the building with adjacent development. Paragraph 6, we must address exterior architectural design of the building and structures. The effect of the height, width, shape, and exterior construction and design must be examined. Our specific plan, once again, states the application, the development must seamlessly fit, must complement the existing town character and charm. Paragraph 3.4. It states in the specific plan, we must connect this part of Los Gatos to the rest of the town. Paragraph 3.4. Last time we had a meeting, I talked a little bit about the history of the vision statement. I like to think of this as is legislative history, but that's because I too am a lawyer and we talk that way. And we had guiding principles. And on January 9th, 2012, that is actually considered in the planning department as a reset. So on January 9th, 2012, this town council had a reset on its development of the specific plan. It said, one of the council members said, it is unfair to the developer and the town to go forward without a vision statement. We will have, if we go forward without a vision statement, we will have discomfort and dissension. We must decide, and this is what we were saying on January 9th, we must decide, will we have a continuation of what we currently exist in Los Gatos, that will continue past Lark to 85, or will we have a distinct district? On the meeting of March 5th, 2012, this council unanimously answered the question with the vision statement and guiding principles that continued the Los Gatos look and feel past Lark onto 85. That look and feel is identified. Actually, I thought this was really helpful because lots of people talk about look and feel. This look and feel was identified in the applicant's Exhibit G to their attachment 17, I believe it was. And they talk about a blend of elements, a variety. They have photographs of the look and feel. They identify the look and feel by pictures taken throughout the town of Los Gatos. And that look and feel is consistent with what I would identify as the look and feel based upon what I, throughout my history here in this Los Gatos, have seen what the town looks like. It's not a uniformity. We don't match. We don't have a uniformity, but we blend. What we have here in this application is a disconnect, not a blending. We have a disconnect. We have a disconnect in the style and the size and the massing. It isn't that Los Gatos doesn't want modern buildings, doesn't want flat roof buildings. That's not the point. The point is that we want a application, a development that blends. We don't want to have a distinct district that the council in 2012 unanimously voted against. So I actually am going to, as my intent, to address the specific plan as it relates to residential separately from economics. So based on those provisions of the specific plan and the other provisions and items which I just addressed, I am now going to move that based on that information, we deny this application for failure to comply with the specific plan as stated. This could be a long evening. All right, that motion dies. Ms. Sayak.
Just a question on the motion. You mentioned that you were intending to discuss residential separate from commercial?
Correct.
So then this motion that is specific to this is just on the residential aspect of
Correct.
the application?
It's based on failure to comply with the specific plan for the reasons stated.
Okay, thank you.
All right, do we have a second? Seeing none, motion dies for lack of second. Mr. Rennie.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. And I want to thank Councilwoman Jensen for the courageous going first and the history of the whole thing. So I'll frame my thoughts here, but with a bit of a long story. But I want to start actually with a story. Shortly after I got elected, I met with Supervisor and former State Senator Simitian. He asked me to lunch. It was kind of a give advice to a newly elected, and I told him I was looking forward to getting out into the community of Los Gatos, meeting people, learning about their problems and concerns, concerns that I could look for solutions and improve the quality of life. But I told him my biggest worry was, how do I make a decision when there's many people on both sides of a passionate issue, and whatever decision I make will make some people unhappy. So his advice to me was to always lead with your values. So let me share some values with you. First, when I got elected, I made myself a promise that I would always vote for what's good for the community in Los Gatos over what was best for my reelection. In this application, there's been a lot of pressure and even bullying to just deny the application without even really looking at it carefully and doing a thorough analysis of the pros and cons in this case, and also gaining a thorough understanding of the legal issues. It kind of felt like a siren song trying to lure me into the political cover of a denial. So I'm resisting the siren song. From my analysis, it looks like a denial is actually a worse result for Los Gatos, because several reasons, but we'll start. State law requires us to approve this housing element site if it meets all the objective criteria. I listened carefully to Councilwoman Jensen and others who tried to poke, prod, and beat on the legal requirements and the objective standards, and I heard nothing that would give us any kind of chance to win a lawsuit. I think it's bad for Los Gatos to knowingly invite a lawsuit by not following state law. We heard Thursday night this could cost us $1 million if we win and $2 million or more if we lose. But beyond cost, I think it's even worse because we're going to lose the ability to ask for changes to the proposal. If we lose the lawsuit, which I think strongly that we would, we get exactly what's there. We get an approval, which I believe there's many things we can change in the proposal to make it look and feel much more like Los Gatos. Thus, I believe a straight-out approval or a denial, which is the same as an approval, is not the best for Los Gatos. I would add that there are some that think it's worth millions, it's worth the town's millions to delay building anything. But there's laws that are coming that are going to make it even harder or impossible to play such games. I want to mention AB 2584 just passed the Assembly yesterday, is on the way to the governor's desk, which will further strengthen the Housing Accountability Act. And two key points in that is the judicial review of lawsuits will now have to be done within 60 days. You can't draw it out for 5 years. And also, it makes it easier for third parties, such as building associations or housing advocacy groups, to sue without the developer even being part of it. So the state is trying to tighten this up even more. So let me go to another value of mine, which is compromise, or meeting somewhere in the middle, especially on contentious issues. Although the issue is of not following state law is forcing us into a compromise, in my analysis, this is where we should. A compromise is where we should start anyway, and see if there's reasonably acceptable proposal can be created from it. What can we change in the proposal? Many do not like the density and the number of housing units, but these are both required by our state housing element. If a developer proposed less density, we'd have to reject it because it didn't meet our housing element. If we could wave a magic wand and make this developer go away, we'd get another proposal that is the same density and potentially even more units, since the current application doesn't ask for the maximum number of housing units. But we could be worse off on many standards we care about because the current application does not push any of the limits. We could get in the Lark district 30% open space instead of the current 43% open space. We could get 15% two-story buildings instead of the current 29%. We could get more residential square footage than the current proposal. It's only 62% of the maximum residential square footage allowed there. We could lose the bicycle improvements and amenities that have been added. We could lose the $6 million in extra payments to the school district. Maybe we should get more units not in the Los Gatos Unified School District, but maybe we would get more units not in the Los Gatos Unified School District, but be forced to take the students anyway, as almost always happens when district lines split a neighborhood. But now Los Gatos Unified School District would not get the extra payment, they would not get the SB 50 payment, they would not get property tax, and they would be much worse off. And since we cannot make land use decisions based on schools, we'd be stuck with whatever situation, a worse situation for the schools without being able to deny it because it's worse for the schools. Another thing to remember is that this application is required to put in traffic improvements to offset the maximum possible build, or at least most of the improvements for the maximum possible build on the North 40. Thus, if we approve Phase 1, there will be significant net improvement in traffic. I know people won't believe it, but at least until Phase 2 or the rest of it is built, it will actually be a net positive in traffic. So again, I think there are many things we can change to make this application much better without taking the high risk of getting no changes and paying dearly for it. So I'd like to give my list, if I could, take a little more time, if that's all right with the mayor. And I'd add one more value here. Another value of mine is seniors. Service for seniors is very important, along with housing and even low-income housing. Some have belittled the low-income senior portion of the project. And if I could tell another story, when I was campaigning, I was knocking on doors in a neighborhood off of Los Gatos Almaden, kind of bounded by Carlton over there, and I knocked on a door, and there was an older lady in a duplex, and she was telling me this story about how she'd lived in Los Gatos all her life, and she didn't have any family to help her, and she was running out of money, and she didn't know how much longer she could live there and where she would have to move to. Sorry, this always breaks me up. So she cried for 10 minutes while I stood in her doorstep. So I told her I would always remember her need. So let me recover from that story, sorry. So let me go to my list of changes that I would like to do, and these are all changes to the satisfaction of the planning director, so they're ministerial reviews that we can do without prompting a lawsuit, in my belief. First, I'd say views are an important value to Los Gatos. So I would say that down the streets, looking to the west, that we replace. So these are the streets that are running towards 17. We replace a few of the trees in that Highway 17 screen with a shorter variety of tree. Again, this is to the satisfaction of the planning director to work this out so that there's a chance to keep some of those views. Second, I would change the Highway 17 screen type of tree from these 65-foot trees to an evergreen that is something in the 40 to 45-foot maturity. Again, the planning director to approve this. I would plant the Highway 17 and lark screen trees, so we're on 3 here, screen trees as soon as possible and before the first building, as is feasible, ensuring that the survival of the trees during the construction. So basically get these trees growing as soon as possible so that we can get the site hidden. So all of these kind of go to, view quarters, but also this value we have in Los Gatos that when we drive down the highway, we want to see trees and we want to see ridges. So by lowering it from 65 to 45, we won't wipe out the ridges, and by getting trees planted sooner, we can see more trees and less of this project. So number 4, I would say that the applicant work with a consulting architect to change the architecture of Market Hall and the surrounding commercial buildings to choose materials that are less like this cold steel and glass and more, I think the words I've heard are materials that age or that kind of blend a little more with the farm setting and probably even blend better with the materials that have been used on the housing units, the wood and the metal. Number 5, I would say change the architecture and possibly materials on buildings 24 and 25, which are the 2 on Los Gatos Boulevard, the 2 residences, to better blend between the existing commercial buildings. These are sitting between the gas station and the one building and then the Hirschman building, those commercial buildings, to better blend with those, and then also to blend to the rest of the site that's going to be behind them. Number 6, I would say change the flat roof row house elevation A style to this Spanish or Mediterranean style that the developer showed us they had available. So we're getting some Spanish into this, that what they showed seemed like it would also blend together with what's there. I would also change the buildings on Lark Avenue. I think Lark is important because this is where the houses blend with the neighborhoods across, and again, they look too modern. They maybe blend with the Netflix building, but not really with the neighborhood. So I would say change buildings 1, 6, 12, 18, and 21 to either Spanish or Craftsman. And again, the applicants showed us that they had some ready-to-go architecture for those. And then number 8, going to my senior value, they also said that they could, without changing the bones of this, integrate 10 more first floor flats in the market rate condominium clusters to provide an additional housing opportunity for seniors. These couldn't be, we can't require them to be age restricted, but they would be more appealing to seniors because they would be single floor flats on the first level. And I believe that is my list. So should I make that a motion or just?
That's it. Right now, we do not have a motion on the floor. So
I'll go ahead and make that a motion to
if you
approve these
could,
changes.
so that we know what the motion is, because obviously this is very important. Would you tell us what portions of that are the motion?
So my motion is to approve the items that I listed. I can list them again.
If you would, please.
And these would be to satisfaction of the planning director. So they would be to remove a few trees that block of the Highway 17 screen that block the view quarters down to the west. Change the Highway 17 tree screen to a 40 to 45 foot evergreen variety. Plant the Highway 17 and Lark screen trees as soon as possible without increasing danger of damage from construction. Work with the consulting architecture on the Market Hall and commercial building architecture, and change the architecture on buildings 24 and 25, which are the two on Los Gatos Boulevard, to something that there's still going to be housing units, but something that blends a little better with the commercial buildings next to them. Change that all of the flat roof row house elevation A styles to a Spanish or Mediterranean style, and change the Lark building architectures, buildings 1, 6, 12, 18, and 21 to Spanish or Craftsman. And then number 8, integrate 10 more first floor flats in the market rate condominium clusters. Those are the big cookies at the top up there. They had units that faced away from the highway that would be ideal for that. That's my motion.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? Ms. Jensen.
I'd be prepared to second the motion. However, I'd like to ask the maker of the motion if he would consider making some changes to his motion.
I would consider. I'm all for compromise.
Okay, wait a minute. This is what I mentioned at the beginning.
No question. Sorry.
So, Ms. Jensen, if you could just make your suggestions.
I will. So, as the potential seconder, I accept the replacement trees, the tree height, and the planting of the trees prior to the buildings. I accept the changes to buildings 24 and 25. And I accept the change proposing 10 more first floor flats for seniors. What I would propose be changed are those suggestions from Mr. Rennie or those things included in his motion that refer to architecture. And rather than specifying a particular style, for example, Spanish style or no flat roof or the other specifications that are listed, I wonder if Mr. Rennie would consider making that change to be have the applicant work with the consulting architect to develop alternative styles to the satisfaction of the planning director.
All right, Mr. Rennie, you have a motion. It's not seconded yet, but there are suggestions. Do you adopt those suggestions?
Yes, I'll adopt those
right.
suggestions.
Do we have a second?
Then I'll second the motion.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Now, discussion. Well, I will weigh in on this a little bit. When the maker of the motion was first discussing basically the foundation for making this motion, he was talking about what does one do when there are people on both sides, and it's difficult. And quite frankly, there's almost always people on both sides. And so what you do when you have people on both sides is you look at your ordinances and your law, and you let that be your guide. And so therefore, that was the reason when I made my motion, I based it all on the provisions of the specific plan. With regard to lawsuits, the lawsuits or the threatened lawsuits have been raised several times during our hearing thus far this evening. And quite frankly, lawsuits and threatened lawsuits have been raised in my history here on the town council. But lawsuits are not a basis for making a decision. The law and your standards and your plans are the basis for making a decision, not lawsuits. Further discussion. Ms. Jensen.
Just some further discussion, and then another request for an amendment to the, I guess I can't request that, so I'll make it a second motion depending on what happens with this. But lawsuits are no part of my decision. I think that we have complied with our specific plan, which is the ordinance now and general plan and zoning of our town. And so for that reason, I think that a motion to approve is also in compliance with our town ordinances. With that, I have previously seconded the motion.
Further discussion. All right, Ms. Sayak.
Okay, so this is a rather difficult decision, I think, for all of us, as you could probably guess by the many questions, many comments, many hearings that this has entailed. But I think what's particularly difficult is based on what everyone has said. I agree with Councilmember Jensen, I agree with Councilmember Rennie, I agree with Mayor Spector. The issue is how do you craft, whether it's a motion or a decision that encompasses the direction you want for us to move forward. Overall, I'm always trying to look for the compromise. The difficulty I have in this particular motion is when we have asked for these changes in the past as a planning commissioner, as a council member, I've always wanted to see what it is I'm approving. And with the project so large and so controversial and so visible as this, I have significant reluctance in just saying, okay, and I'm going to hope for the best. I have utmost respect for our staff. I think they would do this, but I also don't think it's particularly fair to place the burden of all these hearings onto their decision as this moves forward. That's my biggest impediment. You know, we talk about our values, we talk about our wish list. Frankly, I wish I had more time because I do think there are some very positive attributes of this project that we have been able to reach based on the many years that we've been working on this. Whether you like it or not, this will be developed. And there are some very positive things. I think they've been enumerated. I think I need to mention it again. The traffic improvement on Lark and Los Gatos Boulevard has not occurred, and this is a way for us to do that. The community gardens, I'm a big believer in, and that's something that will significantly retain the agrarian history of that area. There's many areas that we can look towards, but unfortunately, the sheer size and complexity of this project just makes it difficult for many people to look towards the positive. We talk about our values. I mentioned in the last one, this evolution of thinking. I am a big believer in that we need to help address the housing crisis in our area. That was the biggest reason that I approved the housing element, one of the biggest reasons I approved the specific plan. I'm totally committed to that. But again, as I mentioned last time, I just don't think that our commitment to build 270 units has to fall on the 20 acres. That's the biggest area where I'm stumbling at. And that's the biggest reason I can't support this moving forward. Now, we talked about the where is it in the specific plan that says that? Well, where does it say that the 20 acres have to be the area for it? And if you are looking at the intent, which I also discussed, Public Policy 101, the intent, as we were discussing housing element, as we were just discussing specific plan, there was an intent, at least on my part, that this was going to be spread out in a fashion so that it would seamlessly blend with Los Gatos. Do I have the architecture and the plans to do that? No. But do I know that this is it? Also no. And so with great reluctance, I can't support this current project. Again, there's so many attributes, and it's not a us versus them. You know, this need to find a villain out of all these many years of working on this, it doesn't have to be there. We're trying to provide housing for people. And when we talk about controversial projects, I remember Netflix, and I remember so many people that said, our community, our character is not, it's not, you know, we don't define it by the buildings. And that was a project that was looking at 85 feet. We define our character in our small town by ourselves. And so the fact that it has gotten so nasty, that's an awakening that if we don't want for this project to fail from the outset, we have to do a little bit more to make sure it's something that we can stand behind. And at this time, I just don't think this is it.
Further discussion? Mr. Leonardis.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. By this time in the evening, you're probably looking at me and saying, hey, that guy's the swing vote up there. And it's always the position that a council member may or may not want to be in. First of all, I want to thank everybody for their extensive writings and participation in this community process. As you can see, there are 4 council members up here who have spoken so far, and there's a lot of emotion. There's a lot of pressure on us to make a decision on behalf of the community. There has been talk about legacy. There's been talk about what's best for the housing, the people of Los Gatos in the future, the traffic, all these things. And this project can solve problems. It can create problems. We've heard from both sides. For me, the difficulty I have moving forward at this point in time is we've received significant feedback from the community. Some of that feedback that I want to bring to light was about the existing units on the property that were occupied by renters. There were 16 of those units, and they were available to low-income applicants, or low-income residents, I should say, and those don't appear to be replaced per se, other than in the form of senior housing. That senior housing is limited to residents that are 55 and older. So I'm not sure of the direct replacement, even though there will be 49 low-income units, how that comes into play with other things that are tied to it, such as the density bonus. There's 3 individuals that spoke at our public hearing, also submitted written correspondence that have brought up points that give me a pause going forward this evening with any kind of a decision until I get more information on these topics. One of them was a guy named Jeff Eisenbaum. He spoke about the grading, and I thought that his presentation was something very unique, very, how can I say it, not the kind of, a lot of us come in with a lot of emotion. There's parents who worry about school overcrowding, there's people who worry about the traffic, those kinds of arguments. There's people who worry about the look of the property. But these are points that I'm bringing forward that if there were to be any kind of litigation, which I pray there isn't moving forward, but I want to get resolve on these things in a way to avoid a potential litigation. Because litigation isn't good whether it's brought forth by the community or the developer. It just, as Mayor Spector mentioned, she's been a part of that ever since, she's been on the council, and I, in my career of 6 years, have witnessed it on a number of occasions already. Looking at some kind of a compromise going forward, I think these points have to be clarified. So one was the grading issue. Another was a letter presented by a gentleman named Peter Dominic regarding the density bonuses. He brought up a lot of good points, and those points could affect the overall amount of units throughout the course of the project. And last but not least was Angelina Dorner brought up the existing rental units and how the elimination of those with the replacement of with the senior-only housing might affect density bonus law and all these things. Now, I know the developer and Mr. Faber, the attorney, presented a good case last time and what their interpretation of those laws were and the density bonuses and the grading and such. But I'm still not satisfied after receiving even more correspondence from the community that we have all the answers on these things. This could adversely affect the number of housing units in this project. And to me, I think we really need to nail down that number before we start talking about where the housing will go, what type of housing it will be, and what income levels will be in those housings and those types of things. So I, at this point, want this to be very well vetted, because this could be the basis of litigation or something moving forward, and I don't think we have all the answers. I think if we as a council voted this through this evening in some form without having this information, inevitably one side or the other could bring litigation, and these points could come up again, and it would be either the basis of the litigation, or it would be, how can I say it? I can't say it. It would be probably the basis of the litigation. So for me, I need more information before I'm willing to move forward with a decision this evening, and that's where I lie on this particular motion.
Thank you. With regard to the pending motion, I'll speak to some of the things raised when that motion was made. There are a number of items that the motion suggests be revised on the application, and those will be done by staff on a ministerial level. Because this project is so large, because these issues are so significant, that would not be the kind of thing that I would be comfortable having vetted on a staff level, as opposed to the Planning Commission and the Council. One of the reasons we are in that situation, i.e. the situation of having this vetted by the staff as opposed to the Planning Commission and the Council, is because there is law that the developer is using that puts a time frame within which this council must make its decision, and that deadline is now September 7th. So there'd be no way for any issues to go back to staff, Planning Commission, and Council. But to the extent that this motion is sending things back to the staff, I think they are far too large and far too significant. With regard to the statements in the motion about how this project will have improvements for traffic and gardening and maybe even bicycling, I can't remember all the things that were said. Those are good things. And those are good things that will happen with a future project. But for me, it has to be a future project that is consistent with a specific plan. And this is not. And lastly, with regard to housing, yes, there is a push by government entities at various levels that the town and other cities provide affordable housing. But the reality is, in this application, we're getting 49 below market rate units for seniors. That's great. But the remainder of the units, the hundreds of the remainders of the units, are going to cost, we were told today, somewhere between $900,000 and $1.5 million, that the person who buys it is going to have to be able to put a 20% down payment, and is going to have a salary of something like $130,000 to $200,000. So we are asked to face a burden of density and intensity and traffic, but we're willing to do it, or at least I'm willing to do it, if we could get more below market rate units. But we are getting relatively few, and we are getting a lot of expensive homes. Further discussion on this motion? All right, we have a motion. It is seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
No. And I'm going to have a show of hands. All in favor? Okay, Mr. Rennie and Ms. Jensen, yes. And let's raise the hands on no. Mr. Leonardis, Ms. Sayak, Mayor, no. May I have another motion, please? Mr. Leonardis.
Not prepared to make a motion at this time, but I think what I'm hearing from the discussion is we have a council that has two different points of view or more, and we have a council that has brought up points about compromise moving forward, changes to the specific plan. We have somebody who's looking for more information to make sure that we dot all our I's and cross all our T's moving forward. I would like to see a third-party opinion of some of these things that could become legal issues, because, again, I don't want this thing to end up, it's not beneficial to the community or to the developer if this ends up in a protracted legal battle. Therefore, I think we need to get this information up front. So for me, I hear compromise, I hear more information, I hear, that's what I hear.
Thank you. Motion? Well, I might as well try the second component of my first motion. And the first one was so successful, I figure the second component will be equally successful. And again, this motion will be based on the specific plan and express provisions of the specific plan. The specific plan paragraph 2.4.2 requires an applicant to do an economic study to assess the economic competitiveness of the application vis-a-vis the downtown. The specific plan includes Appendix A, which is a marketing study. The applicant's Attachment 17, Exhibit 7, attempts to address the Planning Commission's motion. The Planning Commission, as part of its motion to deny this application, referenced the fact that the economic study provided by the applicant was inadequate. So when it came before the council, a new Attachment 17, Exhibit 7, was provided. That economic study failed because, first of all, its center of opinion is that the North 40 does not have a leasing advantage. That leasing advantage opinion is not the kind of information our specific plan was addressing. What we were looking for, and also the specific plan, the application did not address what the 26,000 square feet of commercial will be other than the market hall. The economic study did not address the town's identified commercial leakages, which included general merchandising. It did not address the identified need for 10,000 square feet or above of commercial units. It did not address the new office and hotel uses, which were suggested. And it did not address the number of commercial units by square footage, i.e. X percentage at a certain square footage. So because of these deficiencies in a mandated requirement of the specific plan, I'm going to move that we deny the application. Is there a second? Mr. Leonardis.
I'm not prepared to second that motion, but what I hear you saying is that we are lacking information, and I'm looking for information. I don't believe...
Mr. Leonardis, I'm going to cut you off there, because if I don't have a second, we're not going to have discussion. So do I have a second? Seeing none, motion fails for lack of second. Now we can get into discussion. Mr. Leonardis.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. So, I being one of the two that voted based on the economics, which was eloquently pointed out earlier in the presentation, not being exactly, we were trying to look at things like CUPs in the North 40. We were trying to look at square footages of businesses. That was where, when we were making the motions last time, it fell short for me, and I voted no in one of the categories. So what Mayor Spector just brought forth was, in my opinion, a request for more information, and I would be in support of that request, as well as the items I mentioned earlier, and I want to elaborate on that a little bit. Again, we hear the developer's point of view, we hear the public's point of view about things like density bonus and how many units you're entitled to, and who can live in those units, whether the units are occupied by persons 55 years or older, whether those count, whether the existing below or low income or rentals on the property should be applied towards below market price units, and whether that meets the intent of the town of Los Gatos' ordinance regarding the below market price units. And for me, I would like to get an expert opinion on this from somebody, as well as perhaps an opinion from somebody at the state level, somebody who would recognize, we've heard a lot of talk about our RHNA numbers and how this could impact that and what would happen with our RHNA numbers, considering there might be potential or information in this approval that if it were errant and we made an assumption that our RHNA numbers are all fine and this application was put forth, but it really wasn't, then and it was challenged and it turns out that the citizens were correct, what would actually happen? I don't want to make any more assumptions about this. I want to get all the facts up front. I mean, for me, I'd rather get a little bit of information now than spend the next 2 years wrangling over this thing in closed session and having everybody walk away with less than what they had wanted. I mean, to me, it is really important to get all the details up front, verified by a third party, because we have a developer and we have the community. They do not see eye to eye on this, and we have a council who's caught in the middle trying to make a decision on this. But for me, it's all about the facts. I need to have the facts.
Ms. Jensen.
I'd like to, if I can, convert Mr. Leonardis' comments into a motion and try that. What I hear Mr. Leonardis saying is that we need answers on specific things. One is, have the density bonus units under the density bonus law been replaced, quote unquote, adequately under that law? And that would be, are the 16 units replaced? I know that there is an argument that this plan and application was valid and filed in 2013, so this law doesn't apply. But I'm hearing a council person who remains unsure about that, and we need a legal opinion on that. Help me out, Mr. Leonardis. But also the question of how does the density bonus apply, as raised by Mr. Dominic? We have his communications on our record, both at the Planning Commission and by email. We also have questions from Mr. Leonardis regarding litigation risks, as I understand it. That could either be a confidential memo from our town attorney or a closed session, so that we understand that depending upon which action we take, what does our town attorney believe the ramifications of that to be? The other piece of information is, how does this application comport with our RHNA requirements? Do we need to supply additional low income? Do we not? What gets credited? What does not get credited? How does it get credited? And finally, economics. I don't actually have a question about that, but I understand that there's a dispute about the 3 studies that we've had. And to me, whether leasing is included, whether hotel is included, whether office is included, all of those were included in the original EIR. The council just has a disagreement. That doesn't mean that there's a factual error on one side or the other. It means that there's a disagreement. about how to proceed and how to best help our downtown and how to best to create competition. But I hear Councilman Leonardis want more information on economics, so I'm happy to include that in the information we get. In support of the motion, we have 2 more scheduled meetings on this. I know you're all thrilled to hear that, as I am thrilled to hear it. On September 1st and September 6th. Seems to me that we can get that information back by hopefully the September 1st meeting. And so my motion is for that information to come back, and if necessary, a closed session to be scheduled to discuss litigation.
All right, we have a motion. Do we have a second? Mr. Leonardis?
Thank you, Mayor Spector. I will second the motion, and I would like to ask the maker of the motion if we can have the town reach out to our representatives at the state level and find out what the ramifications are of previously submitted RHNA numbers, and if for some reason there is some kind of an error in the specific plan because of the information that was brought forth by the public or whatever, if the housing units do not add up to be what we thought they would be, what would the ramifications be? I'm sure this has happened before, so I don't want anyone's decision to be based on the fact or a potential ideology that you have to do something because a mistake was made, so you just have to accept a mistake or an error. I want the public's information to be incorporated into our decision, and if in fact they bring forth information that is valid, and if in fact that were to reduce the amount of units on this property, then we need to find out what the ramifications of that are. So I would like us to reach out to the state and find out that information.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Question of staff. Before I get into my discussion of these various elements of the motion, is staff prepared to respond to us by September 1st?
Yes.
And Madam Mayor, before you begin your discussion, I've heard Councilman Leonardis put his comments as a request to add to my motion. So I think that I need to accept or reject that prior to discussion.
Yes.
And I do accept it, and I believe that it's appropriately made to the state housing HCD. I forget what that stands for. To request information from them and an opinion from them with respect to our, and I would add to that, our housing element, should we do something different, and all of those comments that were made by Mr. Leonardis.
Further discussion. Mr. Rennie.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. I'll just add for staff, in case they don't realize it, attachment 15, page 7, there's a letter from the Assistant Deputy Director from Housing Policy Division of HCD that addresses a lot of those questions.
Further discussion? I'm not going to support the motion because there's one component in it with which I disagree, and that's the economics component. I don't believe we need any more information on economics. I believe that it is contained in the specific plan. When I made my motion, I must not have been clear. My motion was that the application failed to comply with the requirements, the specific plan requirements regarding to economic analysis, not that there was not an economic analysis attached. Further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No. Motion passes 4-1. Mayor, no. I believe that is all we have. Staff, anything?
No, thank you.
All right, meeting's adjourned.